we are. We're at the point where once we complete the primary election, which is in 6 days, we're going to be taking legislation to the legislature, and we're going to be saying, we need you to look at this, we need you to act on this, and we need you to tell us what you feel comfortable doing, but we're going to need citizens to tell the legislature how they feel about it too. And what I can gain and my staff can gain from this tonight is hearing from you, also hearing questions that you may have that we can try to answer, but hearing your thoughts and your concerns that we can take, we can consider, we can make further modifications based upon what we hear as we travel the state with this. And so at this point in time, what I'd like to do is to open this up to questions that you may have. And I think Patrick Galloway from my staff may have a microphone that he can provide to you if you have a question. And I don't know if I see Patrick. And if not, you can say the question and I can repeat it so that everyone else can hear it. And the first question always seems to be the hardest, but does anyone want to start?
Yes, I'd like to start.
Yes.
I actually have 6 questions. You can like skip, read, answer, do what you like with 6 questions to make it easier.
I hope you wrote them in big print.
Pardon?
I hope you wrote them in big print. I didn't bring my glasses up here. Okay. The first question is there any existing laws, HAVA or otherwise, that specifically prohibit a voting entity from utilizing a hand-counted paper ballot precinct-level computerless vote recording and tallying system? No, there is not. In fact, if you look at the Ohio Revised Code, there is a section in the code that allows voters to actually vote on using some type of voting system, and I think what this presupposes is moving from hand-counted paper ballots to some rudimentary tabulating machines. Did I forget something, James?
No.
Oh, it's right here? Okay, thank you. Right in front of me. Okay. No, it doesn't, but I must tell you that, and the beauty of the paper ballot is that when all else fails, it can be hand-counted. I'll give you an example. In Putnam County, when the machines went down, we literally had to give that county a directive on how to close the polls and how to count the ballots and how we wanted the ballots tabulated, because it could be done 3 different ways. It could be done through the PEB memory cards, it could be done through the flash memory, or it could be done through the VPAT. And we literally had to say, start with the PEB cards. If that fails, go to the memory card. If that fails, hand count the VPAT. We had one machine where all 3 methods failed, and they were able to take the memory chip and put it in a different machine the next morning and actually count the ballots from that, but it was not great. I think the one caution I would tell you is I have a 92-year-old, and this is only anecdotal, I understand. I have a 92-year-old friend who worked as a poll worker in Columbiana County for many years, and they hand counted the ballots there. And she said one of the worst experiences was as they're reading the vote to the person who's making the hash marks with the 5 marks, she'd look at them and they would have fallen asleep and say, "What? What did you say?" So I know that there has been talk about bringing in fresh teams of people to come in and hand count ballots, and that's probably a very good idea if you can find enough volunteers to do that. Second question, if there's such a prohibiting law, no. What governmental entity, federal, state, or county decides what method is used to tabulate voter ballots with regard to candidates and issues? For federal elections, Congress is entitled to regulate federal elections. So voting machines that are used in federal elections are required to be now they're required to be tested and certified by the Election Assistance Commission. At the time this crop of voting machines was actually introduced into the market, the testing, the EAC was underfunded. That's the Election Assistance Commission in Washington. $800 million of the Help America Vote Act was underfunded, so there was a lack of funding for some poll worker training. And the testing was done by a private entity, the National Association of State Election Directors, known as NASED, which is in part funded by voting machine manufacturers. So essentially, it would be like the Food and Drug Administration telling us that this food or this drug is safe because we tested it, but you find out that it's really not. What I neglected to mention specifically, because I don't want to get into a lot of horror stories, but our researchers did find with the DREs that, for instance, with the ES&S, it contains an exposed infrared port. And the PEB card looks like a square cassette. And when the voter comes to vote, the poll worker puts the PEB card into the voting machine and leaves it in there until the ballot comes up on the screen. When the ballot comes up on the screen, the PEB card is taken out, there's an exposed infrared port, and our researchers were able to take a magnet and a personal digital assistant, a PDA, and actually change votes or inject a virus into that particular machine. And I know at the time I thought, well, okay, well, how do they get it from machine to machine? I mean, this is some kind of voodoo or what? And the problem is that with that model of machine, to open and close those machines, they're daisy chained together. And one PEB card opens and closes all the machines. And then the PEB card, of course, is transferred to the server, and our researchers were able to infect one machine with a virus that spread to the other machines because of how they have to have contact with the memory cards, and then that was able to actually place a latent virus into the server, which could affect a future election. Now, again, the election officials have said, yes, but what are the probabilities of this? And we said, our researchers are security experts, some of the best in the world. It wasn't their job to predict probability. They were there to see if the machines, if the systems could be penetrated. What we saw with the Diebold DRE machines were that the memory card didn't have a buffer or an alert on it. So if the memory card got too full, there was nothing to tell anyone that, so that data would keep being entered on the memory card, and so the data on the front of the memory card would start to go away because the data on the back of the memory card was taking up that space. So these are a few of the examples of what we found in our study. And quite honestly, people have said, well, it's probably not going to happen, but would we ever stand for that in our banking or in our communications? And in this case, we paid for these systems, so why is it that as voters, we're getting the shaft? I asked that question. Now, again, it will be up to the legislature to tell us whether they're willing to do anything about it or not, and they're going to listen to certain election officials who say this equipment is fine, but I don't think we got what we paid for. So let me go to the next question. I talked about the federal government. As far as state law, the Secretary of State and the Board of Voting Machine Examiners, who are appointed by the Secretary of State, actually test and certify equipment for Ohio. We start with whatever's been federally certified, we test it ourselves, we certify it, and only certified equipment can be used by boards of elections. This is where the rub comes in. Many election officials and others around the state are saying, well, in the end, you're probably just going to decertify this equipment, aren't you? Well, again, I can't decertify equipment and leave boards of elections in a position where they have nothing in its place. I know folks would like hand-counted paper ballots, but I don't think it's as easy of a prospect in a county like Summit County or Cuyahoga County as one would think. And so when it comes to actually selecting the voting system, the law provides, the state law provides that it's the county who selects, but the county must select among what's been certified. Next question, if no laws prevent it, will the Ohio Secretary of State's office consider reviewing a hand-counted paper ballot, precinct-level, computerless vote recording and tallying system? I'll consider reviewing anything, but I cannot guarantee that that is what a Board of Elections would use. We like to think of that kind of a system as a last resort if the machines fail, because we have the other interests that we believe that we have to meet. If no law prevents it, okay, optical scanners like touch screens utilize proprietary design software and firmware. Firmware is essentially software that's contained in the individual voting machines that are in the precincts. The net effect of this proprietary system is we as a nation and a form of government are are counting our ballots in secret. My question is, and I will tell you this is in all capital letters bold, do you believe it was the intention of the framers of our Constitution to have our ballots counted in secret? I think that we are in a time in our history where transparency is of utmost importance and where we have observer statutes that we're dealing with from the legislature, and our office just last week, actually I believe it was Monday this week, issued a 15-page directive about the rights and responsibilities of observers in the polling places and at the boards of elections in the process from setting up the polling location, and I specifically provided that observers could be there a half hour before the polls open to watch the setup, through the close of the polls, through the counting of ballots at the Board of Elections, through determining provisional ballots, through the official canvass. And we need that in place because that boosts voter confidence. It's interesting that you'd ask me about the framers of our Constitution, because if you go back to even the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson talked about consent of the governed. He talked about a government whose institution was operated by the consent of the governed. That was the first vision of an election system in a democracy. The Constitution then, as it was drafted, contained an election clause that's been used a number of times throughout history as legislation is developed that affects federal elections. Interestingly enough, voting in the 1700s in some places in the United States was in-person voice vote or standing up or raising your hand voting, which of course promoted coercion and a loss of secrecy of the ballot. And I am pleased to tell you that no matter what rap we get in Ohio, our Constitution started out providing for ballots, which we can say we started out on better footing than other places did in the original 13 colonies. I am a proponent of, if we're using voting machinery, that it be open source code and not proprietary. I can tell you from firsthand experience what headaches we went through trying to negotiate with the vendors about their proprietary information and their trade secret information, and being able to allow access to that by all the people that we wanted to test it, make our non-disclosure agreements compatible, and then having to go day by day by day, concerned about what we could put in a report, what we're able to share even with our attorneys in the Attorney General's office, and what we can do beyond that with the findings in our report, especially with what we had, the limited information we had to redact that, looking at it from vast legal standpoints, was proprietary information. I would rather see a system that is transparent, and in an open source code system, essentially that source code is on the internet. Any programmer is able to look at it and say, you got a glitch here, you got to fix it. And they fix it piece by piece by piece and improve it over time. It's my understanding that that has been used in Australia with much success, and it does not compromise elections or create more fraud. Many of our boards of elections, especially in the smaller counties, are operating, at least half of the 88 counties have only 2 full-time employees at their boards of elections, a director and a deputy director. They may bring in extra people part-time at the right at the time when we get close to the election, but essentially, unless they can have a sharing arrangement with a neighboring county for a technical person, they have to rely on an agent of the vendor, of the voting machine manufacturer, to come in and do their ballot definition, their programming, their pre-election programming, and they have to trust that what they're doing is going to work, is going to be okay. And I think we have a model in the United States of citizen-run elections where we have poll workers from all walks of life who help their fellow citizens vote in an election. And I really don't think that's what was contemplated, that we would turn our voting system over to private companies who don't have the same accountability that election officials have to the voters. So that's the best I can answer your questions. You might not like all my answers, but I've answered them as honestly as I can.
You missed 5. I think you did wonderful.
Number 5, if no law prevents it, and the Secretary of State's office will consider reviewing a hand-counted paper ballot precinct-level computer-less vote recording and tallying system, when and where may that review take place? I'm not ready to do that on a statewide basis at this point. What I have asked for my staff to do is to actually draft a directive on the proper way to hand count ballots, because we know there will be situations, whether it's a recount or whether you've got a machine failure, where we will have to hand count ballots. So we are working on that right now. Thank you. Question back here.
Shall I just try to speak or wait for my... Very careful to make sure that those rights were upheld. We in Ohio have some experience with a Secretary of State that not everyone trusts, and we may someday in the future again have a Secretary of State that not everyone trusts. Does this system that you are recommending, how heavily does it rely on the Secretary of State to carry it out fairly? Does it offer more or less opportunity for mischief?
And you're concerned about the larger polling locations?
The more days that people vote, the more you have to keep track of the records. I'm just wondering about the transport of the records across 15 days when everyone has to be sort of maintaining vigilance instead of all on one day.
What we looked at when I went over this with election officials, at first I said, what if we used a ballot on demand system where we had a computer with a database of ballots and we print out the ballot based that was specific to that person's precinct, which your county has a ballot on demand system, a number of counties do, and it's a great thing to have when you're in a pinch or for people who come to the Board of Elections for absentee voting to get a paper ballot. And they said, well, here's the one thing, what do you do if the machines break down? We'd feel better if we had enough paper ballots printed. We'd either store them, we could either store them at that location in a secure fashion, and your county felt it'd be better to store them in a secure location, in a secure place at the polling location. Others felt that they could transport them every day back and forth. But again, it would depend upon what we would put in legislation, and we said, let's try to pilot it first so that we can really study it and gain some best practices. But the more that's in legislation, the more that's guaranteed to be the same no matter who's Secretary of State. The Secretary of State has the authority to issue directives which carry the force of law for boards of elections. And the reason the statute allows for that is so that we can be nimble and quick in dealing with changing election situations and make sure that we're addressing the individual voters' concerns with the individual areas of voters' concerns as we need to. So with the multiple precinct polling locations, this would really have to be provided for in statute. And I can tell you from my experience in working with emergency legislation that was going to help Cuyahoga County in 6 days with the legislature, there's maybe what I would call a healthy distrust of me. And so they're going to want to see as many procedures in place as possible. And even some of the Republicans who I've dealt with who really weren't in lockstep with the last Secretary of State have said, as long as you're there, I feel good, but I don't know who's going to be there after you, so I'd rather put it in legislation so that we know it's going to work for everyone and it's not going to change over time. And so again, I'm fine to put as much of this in legislation as we can without hamstringing ourselves, because by doing that, we've guaranteed a uniformity of procedures. Because I've been swearing boards of elections officials in for the last 3 days, and they're taking the oath that they will follow the laws of and the Constitution of the United States and the state of Ohio. Yes, my friend.
Yes, Secretary Brunner. My name is Jack Coleman. Thank you for coming, and I'm running for precinct committeeman in Ward 3, Precinct D, against Marco Somerville, council president. So I hope all of you pray for me, because that's what I'll need. But I want to thank you for eliminating Alex Archenkoff from the Board of Elections, because I think that's long overdue. Thank you very much for having the courage, and maybe he will be defeated in the county as well. But do you think that the voters will be able to ever appoint, let's say voters elect the board members or not appointed by the Secretary of State, but voters do that?
Can voters appoint board members?
Yes.
Actually, in some states, the supervisor of elections is actually an elected position. For instance, in Florida, in Missouri, and it's not really set up in a fashion like our boards of elections. It actually is an elected supervisor of elections. That would take a legislative change. Right now, just in case people don't know, there are 4 members of every board of elections. There are 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. Every 2 years, a Republican and Democrat from that board of elections are up for reappointment or appointment, and they're 4-year terms. The political parties nominate someone for their party spot, and the Secretary of State then makes the appointment and essentially must appoint that person unless they find that the person would be incompetent to perform the job. So and the way that Ohio's election system is set up is sort of a check and balance by having equal numbers of people of the 2 major political parties on boards of elections, so that your director is one party and your chair of the board is another party and your deputy director is the same party as the chair. And even if you look at where ballots may be stored, you'll find there will be 2 locks, and a Republican and a Democrat each holds a key to that lock. So it would be a vast change in structure, and it's just dependent upon the political will of the legislature to make that kind of a change.
Thank you. What assurances are you having in place to the people that are listening here tonight that there's going to be a fair election, be it national, local, whatever, that the voters can say, yeah, I think I can trust my board of elections?
We have been working on a lot of things with our boards of elections over the last year and a month or so that aren't very glamorous. Things like setting up electronic bulletin boards for our board folks to actually pose questions, get questions answered in writing. We've assigned an election attorney from our office to every board of elections knows who their election attorney is. They can email them, they can call them, they can get answers to the interpretation of the election laws. And then we literally sat down and broke apart an election into pieces, step by step by step, from the time when a person registers to the time when you may have a post-election audit. And we said, what do the boards need to know about each of those procedures? And we have worked very diligently to provide advisories, directives, so that they have step-by-step procedures and instructions on what to do. And we have taken an attitude with the boards of elections that we are here to help you and to assist you. We want you to call us if you have a problem. We're not here to penalize you. We want you to be successful because it's about serving the voters. I think those kinds of infrastructure and visible things that aren't very visible are actually going to come to fruition in the March primary and even more so in the November general election.
Thank you. Do you think that the local boards of elections should train their poll workers actually a little more? Because sometimes I've been working polls over the years, and I worked the 2004 presidential election, and some of them didn't seem like they were trained enough. Some were like very old, like they were sleeping, and you know, it gets very upsetting that they don't know sometimes what they're doing, and we have to stand there and tell them, well, you know, you got to do this and that, and it doesn't seem like a lot of these boards are training the poll workers correctly.
The average age of poll workers is 72 years old. So one of the reasons why we looked at this multiple precinct polling location was that we could actually create a different class of poll workers. There are people who will do part-time seasonal work, and what we recognized is that if they're doing it day after day after day, by the time we get close to the election, when voting is going to be likely heavier, they're going to be very well experienced by that time. If you were to teach me how to say something in Croatian, and I didn't go to Croatia for 6 weeks, I'd probably forget how to say it. And so the poll worker training is a big issue. And one thing that we've done is we actually worked with a group called Hava Partners with about $120,000 of funding from the Pew Charitable Trust, and we've developed an online poll worker training program that at least 35 of the counties are using for this particular election, so we can sort of standardize some poll worker training according to the type of system.
Great. Thank you, sir. I have one more question. I register people all year round to vote, and sometimes they'll register but they won't vote. What can we do to encourage them to vote after they register?
Well, I love this question. There are all kinds of innovative ways now, especially with young people. What's been done in Oregon is, if we can, especially with young people, if we do a lot of website-based things, such as send them to a website where they can actually download a registration form, download an absentee voter application, or sign up to be a poll worker. We can also create alerts that when they sign up, we can send them an email that reminds them of deadlines. In the state of Oregon, they went a step further and they advertised on the radio, would you like to know more about your election and make sure you do everything on time? Call this number or text message this number and we'll send you text messages at your option when it's time to do certain things for voting. And I got really excited when I heard about that, because that's the kind of thing that we need to alert people that, oh, this is what you've got to do next. Question here?
Secretary, I'm told we have time for about 2 or 3 more questions.
Okay, thank you.
To segue on what you've just been talking about, gee, I paid the bill online today and, put a credit card number out there into the space. Google and Cleveland Clinic are entering into a new agreement for medical data to be online and out there. In some senses, your proposals feel, and I applaud them, but they feel like a sort of retrenchment and moving back from computerization. And I guess I'm eager to hear what's going to happen in our moving to a point in time when perhaps we will look at being able to vote online.
Thank you for the question. I want to make it very clear that I think DREs and the concept of DREs and the ability to vote like that provide a whole lot of opportunity, because if you can have a secure system with a database of ballots, it offers all kinds of convenience for people and accessibility. And so our proposal is sort of a, as you said, a retrenching, and I like to look at it as if the floodwaters are rising, I would rather move to higher ground than get in a boat with a hole in it. And if I can move to higher ground and wait for a better boat to come along, I'm in a lot better shape than if I get in that boat with the hole in it. Now, let me tell you what's actually happening in some states and some pilot situations right now. The state of Florida is piloting kiosks that they have in England and in Germany for overseas voters who will actually be able to go to the kiosk and vote for their ballot in Florida. The state of Texas is able to send their overseas voters a PDF of a ballot that they can then, and it's done with a secure password and so forth, and they're doing that. Again, I think any computer security expert will tell you that a computer system can be hacked, and so that's where great care needs to be taken. But there likely is a potential for that down the road, but we are nowhere close to that yet. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. My name is Peter Kostoff. I'm former mayor of the city of Fairlawn and attorney here in Akron, and I'm also a lifelong Republican. I want to commend you tonight for a very thorough and complete presentation. It's clear that you've spent a lot of time reflecting on this. This is not an easy subject. I fully agree with you that when it comes to our fellow citizens, they deserve and demand that there is not a Republican or Democratic way to count ballots. They want to feel that the integrity of the process is fully committed, and anyone who knows a little bit of your background as a fellow lawyer knows that you're committed to making sure that the system is very professional, and I commend you for that. I'd also like to take a moment, the gentleman in the front had commented regarding the decision that you made in relationship to a local board of elections. I think anyone who values civility and values professionalism and values the rule of law commends you for your decision, for your independence, and And unfortunately, it took someone of independent means to make a determination that the manner in which people conduct themselves is very important in this community and every community. And I applaud you for that.
Thank you very much. Okay, maybe one more question? Okay, well, I'll take two, because I've got one here and I've got Adele. So let me start with Adele, and then I'll take you then, sir.
Great. Hi.
Hi.
How are you tonight?
Nice to see you.
Good to see you too, Madam Secretary. I guess I'll put my questions into some major categories to keep them short. Part of it is a comment and a question. I find some disagreement with some of the conclusions that were put up on some of these charts. For instance, what the activists' interests are, and they're not interested in the costs. Hand-counted paper ballots are actually far more cost efficient. I think that some of the truisms that are put up might have a larger perspective that could be seen. And I'm wondering, one question is, when we have these town hall meetings, which I think is a phenomenal concept, number one, where is the opportunity for people to get the other side of the education, such as the negative reports by Project Vote, etc., about multiple precinct locations and possible confusion that they cause, or the negative parts of what normally sounds very attractive, to just having a ballot mailed to you. But very few people know that there is a lot of other research done by other states that promotes vote fraud, buying and selling of votes. It suppresses low-income voting, people who tend to move a lot, never get their ballots, or they have insecure mailboxes. So my overall question, number one of three basic questions, and I'll make the other two very short, is when will we have the opportunity for the public to hear the other side, factual other side, not made up other side, but solid research?
Well, you're here, Adele, and you're very good at what you do. And we set this up, so I think what you're probably talking about is how we structured the forum. And essentially, there's a lot of information in this study, and we wanted to simply get it out and have people like you make your points known, make your views known, because I trust that you'll be involved in the legislative process. You sit on our advisory council for the Voting Rights Institute, and we did pay attention to what a lot of that research was. We came away from pushing the less voting locations and said, okay, continue in the voting locations that we talked about. We listened to what activists and researchers said about overvotes and central count optical scan, and we said, okay, go ahead and count at the precinct level, but let's do a comparison. And so I think we've listened, but I think logistics for this type of forum make it impossible for me to try to present both sides of the issue. I do, because I'm a former judge, and I do try to say the on the other hand, and try to present things as objectively as I can. But I just think the volume of information that you have and that you hold in your head, I just don't have the time to present it all.
And I wouldn't expect you to, but I would like to see some, because the media very often comes to you for statements, and that's what most voters might read, that I would really like to see a refraining from the statement that we're moving into paper ballot systems and getting rid of electronic voting. Most people don't understand that the very Everest report showed that what Cuyahoga was just basically forced to get for the central count optical scan system, and it wasn't really a Republican Democrat. I'm a Democrat. I campaigned for you. I mean, I was thrilled when you got in. So,
thank you.
Yeah, and it's not a Democrat versus Republican battle. It may become that in the legislature, which leads into my next question. But I think that we need public education about both sides. It is not true to say we're moving into paper ballot systems and getting rid of electronic voting systems. Just because the voter interface looks like paper, we have taken away transparency, certainly in Cuyahoga County. Putting it all central count, we have voting machine vendors who, if people read the Everest report, they don't have very much faith in the voting machine vendors. And we have voting machine vendors actually running our tabulator with people who have not had the time in a month and a half for this transition to even learn what to look at, to watch these people. We don't know who they are. And so it's real difficult. I think that some of the recommendations might be moving backwards rather than forward, and I'd really like more public education. So at these forums, I don't feel like I'm either taking up too much time or I can't get my points across. I think that the education needs to come from your office, which leads me probably to my second and last, just because of...
Well, let me say one thing. I have a job. I have a job to do, which is I'm the Chief Election Officer of the state of Ohio. I have a job to administer elections. I have to make the tough decisions that no one else is in a position to make. And I do not operate in an ideal or perfect environment. Cuyahoga County was the lesser of two evils, and either way, whether we stayed with the old system or we went with a new system, it was my responsibility to make it work. And I did what I thought was best under the circumstances, which was to move to an interim position, which I know you don't like, and I know a lot of people aren't comfortable with, but it was the best we could do in the time that we had, because we're dealing with a county that whatever happens in Cuyahoga seems to reflect on the rest of the state of Ohio, and I want my state to be successful, and I want the rest of the country to quit looking at Ohio as a pariah. It's not perfect, but it's the best we can do under the circumstances, and I'm an administrator and I have to make decisions, and I can't just be an educator and present information. I have a job to do.
I understand that, and I appreciate that. I think maybe more could come from your office, but not just from you personally. And I understand your feelings about Cuyahoga, and you understand mine. The fact that there are no tabulations at the polls absolutely occludes any possibility for decent auditing. That is not transparency. That's the auditing is the first. Even Patrick Daniels, the man, the scientist who's been traveling and headed up the Everest testing, has said that. We have no chance to even audit properly because we don't know. Really, we have no record of vote totals at the polls.
There is a white paper that's been produced by the Voting Rights Institute. We've studied that, and I'm actually in the process of reviewing a directive to begin a post-election audit process, and I thank you for the input that you've given to that.
Yes, I was one of the formers of that. So I'll end with this concept. With my, as you know, I have seen, or I have presented research that shows the other side of these recommendations, that maybe they should not be implemented in the way that they are being implemented, or that, in fact, the Voting Rights Advisory Council suggested an advisory council to you, just working on the recommendations, seeing how we might improve them given all of the input from around the country, from other studies, including your own. Many of the recommendations seem to fly in the face of the Everest findings to me. So, but that has not been implemented. So I implore you to do that. But I also implore you to look at that process of bringing the information, the honest information, the balanced information from your office to the people, and hearing the input on these recommendations before you take them under emergency legislation to the legislature. It's very difficult for the average citizen to impact the legislature, that's a whole different process that can get into a
It's
partisan
difficult for
process.
us to impact the legislature.
I understand. And our input to the legislature is far different. There is a whole, with that whole midday pickup, the last one that went on emergency. I mean, I saw the process, and it was not what I would consider a back and forth. It felt, you know, we could be out there shouting, you know, making little comments, but the process was nowhere transparent to us. So why don't you take these suggestions to educate, let us have empowered thought, give you input, and then take the recommendations to the legislature. The one that you just passed today, the Board of Voting Machines examiners is 3 people, none of whom are computer experts. I don't understand how they are going to test these electronic poll books that your own Patrick McDaniels from your own Everest report says are vastly sub-professional standard, and they don't work.
Thank you, Adele. The Board of Voting Machine Examiners is not going to do the testing. We've actually been in discussions with Patel Memorial Institute, who was the program manager for our voting machine study, to start to develop the testing standards and protocols.
Okay.
And the testing will be done at the direction of the Board of Voting Machine Examiners, but by experts who are able to accomplish those tasks.
I feel better about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, you had a question.
I was just curious how you're going to measure success or failure of what changes.
First of all, we have to get the legislature to buy into any changes, and that's a process that isn't too pretty sometimes. You've heard about sausage. So, second, we are going to rely on, we have an entity in our office called the Voting Rights Institute. Folks like Adele and people from the political parties, although the Republicans quit on us, but the League of Women Voters, People for the American Way, NAACP, we've got a lot of groups who we say, let us vet some of these ideas with you. And they've actually broken into work groups, and they provide us with information, and we will be talking to them about their thoughts. We'll be talking to other experts. We figure as many people as we can get participating in the process. 2 heads are better than 1, and 14 are a lot better than 1, if you can get these shared ideas. So we'll be also talking to some academic research organizations to try to develop what kinds of variables we need to be testing for. And again, it will be a question of the legislature allowing us to pilot something. One thing that's been politically interesting is that when I place this in the lap of the other party and say, you need to work on this with me too, it really creates a disincentive for partisanship, because if that happens and nothing occurs and this information is out here, then it has to fall on someone's shoulders. And so I'm hopeful that the partisanship can be set aside, we can work on these things together, and what they end up saying is they have to hold their nose because they don't like me, which I don't care, it's fine. I was a judge, not even half the people liked what I did before. They may have to hold their nose, but they end up saying, give her what she wants, let her hang herself with it. And if I'm willing to do that, and I do have a lot of background and expertise, but I want to listen to a lot of folks so that we make the best decision possible, I'm willing to take that risk. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to come here this evening, especially in all the snow. We want to hear from you, and we really appreciate your
It's been here a long time. Dan Kaufman, Diana Saws.
How are you? You're looking wonderful.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, how's things? Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you guys are late. I heard about this just this afternoon, so I thought I can come. Since I haven't been going through.
Cool. This is beautiful. Isn't this library beautiful?
Oh, yeah, it's my first time back.
I'm going to turn this up.